Hi everyone, my name's Lorenza and many of you requested how I did this zipper with a waistband and a lining. I think I showed some reels on Instagram where I showed it, and a lot of people said, can you please do a YouTube video where you show us how you did the inside? So you can see there's the lining, there's the waistband. Obviously I showed you from the outside first because it looks a lot prettier. So yes, I'm going to show you how I did this the zipper with the lining and the waistband. Now, I've already got a video on YouTube showing how to do an invisible zipper, so I'm not going to show you how to do the invisible zipper in this video because you can just check out my other video on how to do that. So I've already done some prep work here. So here is the waistband, the top. Let me show you from the other side. Here is our pretend skirt out of calico. So there is the waistband, there's the zipper I've already popped in, and so imagine that's the skirt, that's the waistband, and here's our invisible zipper. Now, what is key with doing this is just a bit of prep work. Your main bit of prep work is folding in that seam allowance. I've drawn a line on it, so it's really obvious here, and I'm working with 1 centimeter seam allowance. So whether you draw that in with a texter, I use these Crayola washables because they wash straight out. So I've drawn it in here at 1 centimeter. So whether you draw it in or just you know what it is and you press it. So that is the key thing with doing this, because when you get to the end, it's going to be very hard to press that under. So you want to do it first. So do it before you even attach it to the waistband. So I'm sorry, to the skirt. So I pressed the waistband seam allowance under on both of them, then sewed the waistband onto the skirt, and then I put the zipper in. So just absolutely make sure you do that part first, because that is the last part of the waistband you need to do. Now I've cut out some, so here's the inside, there's the outside, and I will just do one side of the lining to show you. I'll do this side. And so here is some lining I have pre-cut as well. Now, I know this isn't a real skirt, it's just a small mock-up because it is incredibly hard to show full piece items when you're doing these YouTube videos. But as you can see, hopefully, that the lining piece is the exact same size as it would be if it was the skirt. So it's the exact same piece size of fabric. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to attach the lining to the zipper and the bit of the skirt that's attached to the zipper. But we're not going to attach it like this. The way we're going to attach it is so you can't see it. So essentially we're wanting to fold it over, if you can imagine. We're going to flip it, we'll be pinning it from this side. So just lining up the top of the skirt and the lining as it is the top of the skirt on the calico. So I'm just going to pin that there. So I hope that makes sense. Let me pin it and then I'll flip it back over and show you. So we're just going to pin that down. So we're making sure we're not catching the skirt. We're just getting the skirt, zipper, or centre back seam allowance, and that zipper tape. So I'll pop some pins in. And also I've already sewn the centre back of the skirt because I tend to do that last. So the centre back in the outer, the calico, that's already sewn. I always do that. I do the zipper and then I sew the from the bottom of the skirt up. That's just my preferred way. And I was also going to say, I was never taught how to do this. This is just something I've worked out. So don't come at me saying, that's not the way you do it. This is just how I've worked out to do it to make it look nice and neat. It's certainly not a way I've been professionally taught when I was studying. I don't remember ever asking how to do this when I was studying. I think, yeah, I've just had to figure it out on my own. So I hope you can see there. See how this is lining up perfectly? So top of the lining, the top of the skirt, and I've just pinned it along here. So you can imagine once we've sewn it, that will flip over. And that's the idea. We want it to sit there really nicely. So we want it to sit there really nicely and sit the top of the lining along the top there of the skirt. So I'm going to take it over to the machine and sew it along here. Now you could do it with a like a left or right zipper foot to get in really nice and close, but I just always do it with a normal foot. I don't feel like with a lining you need to have this really right up close because no one's seeing it, it's on the inside, so I think you're fine to give it a little bit more room here. If you want though, by all means, sew it quite close to the zip, but still give it a little bit of wiggle room so it can zip up and down. You don't want that zip catching on it. So let's take it over and just sew down here. Okay, so we're over here at the machine and just showing you where I'm going to start. I'm going to start with the zipper tape ends for the lining. There's no point in attaching the lining to the center back of the skirt because we will join the center back of the two lining pieces after the zipper. So just like the end of the skirt. So this is the bottom of the zipper and the bottom of the skirt essentially. So I'm going to get that lining and I'm going to sew it from here. So just where that zipper tape ends, because yeah, like I said, we will get the lining and join the center backs of the two linings when we're finally done. So, and yeah, I'm just doing this with a normal zipper foot. So do a bit of back stitching and then just sew it along. Nothing too wildly exciting here. So just catching the skirt center back, the zipper tape and the lining. I think this foot, this is where I probably could have done it definitely with a left or right zipper foot because I've only got a 1 centimeter seam allowance. That's what I forgot. If you were doing a 1.5, this normal foot would probably be much happier doing it, but this normal foot is trying to push off the edge because it doesn't like the 1 centimeter seam allowance, but I'm going to keep going with it anyway. So there we go. We've sewn that bit. So we're back over at the desk now. So you can see there that is just nicely sewn in. And like I said, there's a bit of a gap here, which is fine for your lining. So the next bit we're going to do, and you'd all know how to do this if you've ever sewn a skirt or a waistband before, we're needing to get this part of the waistband folded over and looking nice and tucking all that zip in there. So what we do is we tend to flip it over or unzip it, and we're folding this bit back on itself. So most of you would know how to do this, and you want to sort of tuck that out of the way because we're trying to hide all that in the seam allowance. So that is the next bit we're going to do. But this is the bit, I guess, where it's interesting with the lining. And that's why the order of steps that you do this is just so important, because remember we've got that bit that we sewed there before. So we're going to, like I said, we're all used to this bit where you flip this down. There's waistband, we're flipping it on top of itself so we can tuck the zip out of the way and it'll all look nice and neat. But see, we've got this lining here, and I'll zoom in. And so we're going to sew down there, which I think you'd all be used to, but we're going to sew over the lining, over this bit here. So you can tuck that piece of lining in there. Don't be scared, we're going to sew over the top of it. So yes, I will absolutely switch to my left or right zipper foot just so I can get it a bit closer here and show you how that's meant to look. So I'm going to sew from the top here, get this piece of zipper tape out of the way and sew down as close as I can and sew over that lining. Don't be worried about catching that in. That is an important part of the next step. So I've moved to the left zipper foot here, so you can see I'm going to be able to get in really nice and close down there. I hope that's in focus. I'll just take that pin out because I don't like to sew over pins, and you can see I'm pulling the zipper tape here because I want to get that out of the way. So we will fold that, and also because we've drawn on these seam allowances, you can see that I'm just making sure these bits match up, and that means we'll be definitely at the fold on the waistband. And also, where I was saying before with the lining, how we do need to catch the lining, and I said you can just do it with the normal zipper foot, but we want to make sure that lining, we don't want to leave that gap because otherwise the lining isn't going to line up on the skirt. So just make sure you fold it over a little bit because we're wanting the skirt lining to match up with the fabric of the skirt. So you can use the left or right zipper foot to get it in closer, or you can just kind of roll it in like I'm doing here. This is what I did on the white skirt where I showed you earlier. So do some back stitches. We're going to get in nice and close. Oh, my thread has come out. Let me rethread. So we're just going to sew in nice and close, and like I said, roll that lining, making sure the waistband, the end of the waistband's matching up perfectly down here at the bottom. I think you can see there it's looking really nice. So we'll just sew that down. All right, I'll take it back to the desk and show you. So I really hope you can see here just how neat and nice this is starting to look. So what we're going to do is flip this through. I would trim this off. Just let me get some, sorry about that noise, pinking shears. And I always usually cut just that corner off because we want to cut that bulk out so it turns through nicely. So turn that through nicely. So that's how it looks from the outside. So I think most of you would be used to knowing how to do that. See how that all looks nice. You'd do that if you had a facing. So I think that's all pretty standard. We know that. But you can see here, see how nice and neat this is looking now, how that lining's going to get tucked up nicely under. So I'll just flip it around again to show you. So we folded that over, you sew a bit over the lining there. Then when you flip that around, you'll see that that lining is going to get tucked nice and neatly under there. See how neat that is starting to look already? So the next step is we're just going to sew this lining, the top of the lining here, to the top of the skirt. Now you're not probably going to be able to get right up in there, but that doesn't really matter. We're just going to attach it. So just sewing along there and get as close as you possibly can. So obviously make sure you're not sewing through to the waistband or anything. You're just going to grab this bit like that and then sew along there really nice and close. So I think you're almost getting the gist here of how we're going to make this look nice and neat. So we're going to sew the lining, the top of the lining to the top of the skirt and the waistband there. So there's 3 layers there. So I'll take you back to the sewing machine and we'll do that bit next. Now, yes, I would absolutely always recommend to pin this, but because I'm working with just a small sample, I know to just match that lining up with the top of the waistband, bottom of the waistband, top of the skirt, those 3 layers, and just sew it. So this would be your side seam of your skirt. And I think even when I did the white skirt, I didn't bother pinning it because it's the side seam and I knew what I was doing. Now I do need to change my foot back to the normal foot because I just think the left and right zipper feet never do as good a job. So I'm just going to switch over that foot while we're here. Okay, we've got the normal foot back on. So just going to sew the bottom of the waistband, the top of the skirt, and the top of the lining of the skirt. And depending on your seam allowance would be where you're going to sew it. So my seam allowance is 1 centimetre, so I'm going to do it close to 1 centimetre. If it was a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, I'd probably do a 1 centimetre sewing it in. So yeah, I'll do it close, but it doesn't really matter. You're just trying to get the lining to hang on to the skirt here. Doesn't have to be, it really doesn't matter because you're not going to see it as long as it stays within that seam allowance. So just going to sew that in and I'll sew up as close as I can. Look, that's about as far as I can go without getting it too bunched. So I'll just leave that there. So back at the desk, I'm just going to zip this up so you can see how it's starting to look here. So we have just done the one side, and obviously everything we're doing to this side, you would then do to the other side as well. And you can be doing these steps at the same time, but I'm just showing you on one side for the sake of making this video a little bit shorter. So you can see we've sewn this in, that's not showing on that side at all. And then the last step, so it's all looking pretty nice and neat, and let me show you from the outside as well. So the very last thing you'd need to do, and on my white skirt, I hand stitched it. I think you could probably see, but essentially I just hand stitched this bit down now, and then that tucks in any of that seam allowance in and you can't see it. The other thing you could do is you could stitch in the ditch along here. So if you're not sure what stitch in the ditch is, have a Google, have a look on YouTube, but that is how you would hide all that seam allowance and everything else that is in there. So that is how I sew a lining in with an invisible zipper when you've got a waistband. So like I said, everything we did on this side, you would now do on that side. For me, I prefer a nice hand sewing just to finish it off. But yeah, you can do a stitch in the ditch. I just think it doesn't look as nice. I think you can do some really lovely hand stitching and make it look almost invisible. So that, yeah, is how I do that zipper. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. And yeah, follow along for more and let me know any other tutorials you would like. Thanks, bye.